Morihei Ueshiba, who is the founder of Aikido, once said that life is growth. As soon as we stop growing technically and spiritually, we're as good as dead. And this principle is fundamental to how I live my life, and I think is also the secret to being a good preacher. And I say preacher, not a speaker, because I speak to the same audience almost every week, year after year, right? Which means that what I say needs to always be fresh, interesting, and relevant. If I were an occasional speaker, I could focus on a particular area of interest and expertise and give the same speech to different audiences, tweaking it a little here and there. But as a preacher, what I say would soon become boring and irrelevant if I only delivered what is essentially the same sermon each Sunday. Of course, there are many religions with preachers and ministers and faith leaders who do exactly that. In fact, exactly that is precisely what is expected of them. As a student of the Christian ministry, especially as a former Southern Baptist, we were taught to always speak from one source, the Bible, and from that tradition's very particular interpretation of it, always leading to a message that ended up talking about the greatness of God or the Lord Jesus. Over the years, I've often had some from other traditions ask, befuddled, well, if you don't speak from the Bible, what do you speak about? And it's an odd question when you consider the great and countless number of inspiring sources there are, the writings of all religions, along with poetry and philosophy and psychology and science and virtually anything from which I might gain insight that's worth passing along. When not limited to one set of scriptures or one ideology, life becomes vastly more interesting and worth talking about. So much so that I don't think I'll ever run out of things to talk about. Yet there is another perspective that I've often heard go around, including among Unitarian ministers, who have told me that they actually learn it in their homily classes at Unitarian theology schools, that every minister has only one or two sermons in them, and the secret is learning to say them in different ways. I just shake my head. If this were true for me, occupying my pulpit would be the least favorite part of my job rather than my most favorite. It's my favorite because for me, as Ueshiba said, life is growth, and I'm always striving to learn more and to grow as a person, which means in the process, I have many new insights to share. Although I return to various themes that hold my interest and some of which have become integral to my life and to my thinking, my sermons and subjects reflect where I am at this point in my life, and often where a lot of us are at. They are, in short, my personal reflections, an opportunity to organize my thoughts, and to think about important reminders and matters that are shaping my own growth and evolution. In this sense, I really am up here preaching to the preacher. As I said last week at the start of my sermon on technology, I'm going to enjoy it even if no one else does. So it's been beneficial to me, and I hope to others, to have an annual Preaching to the Preacher sermon as a further reminder of the key insights that have proven most important in my own continuing growth and sojourning. For those of you who might not be aware by now, social psychologist Erich Fromm has long companioned me on my continuing journey of growth, including during one of my earliest sermons in 2025, The Insane Society, the Pathology of Normalcy and the Necrophilious Orientation in Today's World. delivered on January 12th in the immediate aftermath of Donald Trump's re-election and inauguration. Like many of you, the greatest question on my mind was how so many of our fellow Americans could have voted for such a scoundrel, to put it mildly. Fromm spent most of his life working to better understand why societies so often choose authoritarianism over freedom, destruction over development, death over life. His answer, in short, is because most of us would rather belong than be free. We are terrified of being excluded from society and its benefits, which is why his very first book, Escape from Freedom, written in 1941 while Hitler was still in power, was originally entitled The Fear of Freedom. Essentially, it says that we are willing to give up our freedom in order to fit in. In this particular sermon, I focused on what Fromm referred to as the pathology of normalcy in his 1955 book, The Sane Society, in which he argues it is possible for an entire society to go nuts. It should be called the Insane Society. This book deals not with individual pathology, Fromm writes, but with the pathology of normalcy, including with the pathology particularly, I should say, with the pathology of contemporary Western society. So he was recognizing this about us a long time ago. By the way, Fromm was the first psychologist to even insinuate that an entire society could be mentally ill. Anyway, that pretty much sums up my feelings about the U.S. after the election of Donald Trump. The fact that millions of people share the same vices does not make these vices virtues, Fromm says. The fact that they share so many errors does not make the errors to be truths. And the fact that millions of people share the same forms of mental pathology does not make these people sane. He also uses the term consensual validation to describe the thinking of those who believe their vices, ideas, and pathologies must be right just because lots of people share them. So these two terms, pathology of normalcy and consensual validation, have struck me this year as useful frames for understanding what's happening around the world, including here in the U.S. During the past year, I also read one of Fromm's final books for the first time, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, written in 1973, based on his very in-depth study of the authoritarian mindset. It was the basis of my June 29th sermon, How to Survive Rampant and Malignant Narcissism, Death, and Destruction. What a title, huh? In it, he continues to remind us that it is freedom, not submission, to the will and mind of an authority that, in his words, is the condition for the full growth of a person, for one's mental health and one's well-being. Freedom. It is essential for us to be free, to be healthy. Yet we have often chose leaders who, he says, all too frequently use the slogan that they are leading their people in the battle of freedom, when in reality their aim has been to enslave them. This sermon was part of my continuing attempt to understand the mind of Donald Trump and what remains for me his unthinkable election to the White House twice. Although controversial, many psychologists have publicly labeled Trump a malignant narcissist, a condition based on Fromm's discussion of what he terms malignant forms of narcissism and necrophilia that contribute to a syndrome of decay that he says represents the quintessence of evil. It is at the same time the most severe pathology and the root of the most vicious destructiveness and inhumanity. Without saying more about this today, it is an explanation that has helped me understand Trump, and tragically one that seems to be confirmed anew each day. But the more troubling question again is, how could so many American voters, slightly more than not, have chosen to put such a troubled human being into office? To answer this question, Fromm outlines three kinds of social systems. The revolutionary humanistic system, which he says values life, growth, creativity, and the unfolding of human potential. There haven't been a lot of societies like that, but there have been some. The authoritarian system, marked by submission to power, rigid hierarchies, and the suppression of individual freedom. The authoritarian is obviously a downward grade from the revolutionary humanistic ideal, but the most destructive is what he calls the necrophilious orientation, characterized by a fascination with death, control, and mechanical order that was embodied, for example, in Nazi Germany, where he says destruction and domination were ends within themselves. Right? That's the whole point. That's the whole point of existence, is to destroy, to tear apart, to make life miserable. And this explanation has helped me understand why my fellow Americans who voted for Trump, or voted for Trump, I should say, who were perhaps acting from an authoritarian impulse to force others to accept their wills by unwittingly voting for a man who only knows how to destroy, covering rose gardens with concrete, bulldozing the east wing of the White House are among the most minor examples. Yet the important point, as I said in that sermon, as Fromm explained, is that we are not necessarily ruled by one or another of these syndromes, and that the average person is actually a blend of both. Those who helped Trump, or elected Trump, I should say, are not sinister. Like most of us, they recognize things have to change. They want things to change. They just made an authoritarian choice to force that change on others. But as I said in my November 30th sermon just a short time ago, that sermon, "Who's to say we have to lose for someone else to win?" The same malignancy that's overtaken much of the world is also sweeping through our Unitarian congregations and communities. In my 31 years as a Unitarian, 26 of them as a Unitarian minister, the hostility that I've witnessed and experienced within our denomination and in our churches in recent years is as shocking as it is unprecedented. This virulent epidemic of the mind and heart has seriously weakened our commitment to the very tolerance that once immunized us against it. And this helps me recognize that the line between many Trump voters and those who voted against him is a thin line. Those who didn't cannot hold animosity in their hearts against those who did, especially when too many on the left treat those they disagree with just as dreadfully, condemning, canceling, and forcing them to go along with the crowd or else. The majority of Americans, as well as most people in the world, need to shift toward that humanistic, revolutionary mindset if we want to make the world better, because that's the only way to get there. I do take some hope from the following statement in Fromm's book on human destructiveness. The half-insane leader is often the most successful one until his lack of objective judgment His rage reactions against the consequences of any setback, his need to keep up the image of omnipotence, may provoke him to make mistakes which lead to his destruction. In my opinion, this is now happening to Trump, as his popularity in the polls continues to fall, even as members of his own party are finally beginning to defy him, to dismiss affordability as a Democratic hoax, while giving himself an A+, on the economy, reveals both his narcissism and his delusional mind to almost anyone, no matter whether they voted for him or not. The more important question now is, how will our society begin to truly become a pro-life society? By turning toward true freedom, tolerance, and the growth, creativity, and unfolding of every person. Another important voice in my sermons at least in my life during the past year, has been Reverend John H. Dietrich, the father of religious humanism, who was also the minister of our Spokane pulpit a century ago, more than a century ago now. In my attempts to promote his relevance to our religion and to today's world by occasionally delivering one of his old sermons, he has become increasingly relevant to me. For example, I've long considered myself cosmopolitan in my thinking, meaning that I consider myself more of a citizen of the world and of humanity than I do an American. I've also long believed that nations are false and fictional concoctions meant to divide the human family. But when preparing to give Dietrich's 1919 sermon on nationalism and internationalism in May, my mind shifted. In spite of the fact that there are those who hope for the day when all international boundaries shall be removed, Dietrich counters, when there shall be no more divided humanity, I am inclined to agree with the very ancient saying, boundaries are sacred. Boundaries are practically necessary in every form and phase of existence. He admits, from the idealistic point of view, patriotism looks small compared to cosmopolitanism. To love the world seems so much nobler than to serve one little country. He calls this an anti-internationalist view, yet says, to love one's country should not mean to hate all others, any more than to love one's home means to despise all others. In fact, a real love of one's country implies respect for the loves of other peoples. How, after all, can we not feel closest to the land, people, and culture where we are from? Instead of rejecting such sentiments, Dietrich contrasts a low understanding of patriotism, defined by empire, power, glory, flag-waving, military pageants, and slogans like Deutschland über alles, Germany above all, Britannia rules the waves, and America first, with a higher notion of patriotism, defined, as he says, by love of country in terms of literature and art, social progress, and ethical idealism. To one such as this, he says, one's land is the realm of beauty and goodness. It is the place where happy, prosperous, and noble people live. Territory does not interest him, but justice does. Military power leaves him cold, but social improvement exalts him to the stars. If he thinks of empire, it is the empire of ideas, and if he dreams of power, it is the power of righteousness. This is the type of patriotism and love of country I believe in. This sermon shifted my thinking on the subject in a way that I articulated in that recent aforementioned sermon, Who's to Say We Have to Lose for Someone Else to Win? In fact, it inspired that sermon. I say, I want the U.S. to succeed, but I also want China and Russia and Israel and Palestine and North Korea and Iran and Venezuela and all the people around the world to succeed, because I don't lose just because they win. And I want them to win. It's okay to take pride in and love the place, the people, the culture from which I sprang, from which we spring, while also caring about the welfare of people everywhere. And to understand that we are all part of one human family and that we all succeed and prosper together just as we ultimately fail and suffer together. Dietrich's sermon also influenced my May 18th sermon, Toward a World of Open Arms and Open Borders. It was a sermon I'd planned to give before I ever worked on Dietrich's sermon, which I had given only a week earlier on May 11th. I'd intended to respond to Donald Trump's inhumane, racist, and anti-immigrant policies. In Dietrich's 1909 sermon, given only 2 months after the end of World War I, hey, Fromm and him were on two ends of the war, so I got a little confused this morning. World War I, rather than calling for the U.S. to tighten its borders, right, which is what you think would be the reaction, we just went through this hellish war. Rather than calling for the U.S. to tighten its borders, he spoke in anticipation of an international peace conference and of the possibility of it establishing, in his words, some kind of league or fraternity of nations which will assure us that fighting on a universal scale will never again blast the earth, making it possible that an Englishman will not be a foreigner in America any more than a Pennsylvanian is a foreigner in Minnesota. It was a beautiful hope that I further emphasized by summarizing the key points of his visionary sermon into a single paragraph, which is worth repeating here. There are many who tell us that until we have moved beyond this present resting place of the nation with its borders and boundaries and barriers, we cannot hope to construct the fabric of that ideal internationalism of which the prophets have dreamed. To love one's country should not mean to hate all others any more than to love one's home means to despise all others. We must learn that the interests of the whole are greater than the interest of any one part. This does not mean that we should not love the nation to which we belong. It means rather that where there is a clash between the interest of our nation and the world at large, we must recognize the supremacy of the interest of humanity to those of the nation. That beyond the nation is the world, and beyond the people of one country, the great circle of humanity. And I believe the day will come when we shall recognize that our first and highest duty is to mankind as a whole and not to any single section of mankind. And each nation will grant the right of interchangeable citizenship so that no dweller in a new land will need to go through the process called naturalization. It's tragic that his vision for us more than a century ago is not the world nor the nation most of us live in today, which is why Dietrich remains as relevant to us now as he did then, and why I remain committed to reviving his voice and significance in today's world. So you can expect to hear more from John Dietrich in the year ahead. Dietrich was also an inspiration for a couple of fun sermons during the year. His brief 1922 essay, What to Read and Why, inspired me to talk about some of the most influential books that I've read. And you can find my book list along with that sermon on our church website, but for now, I concluded it with the following statement. Reading is about moving and growing, which are the very definitions of life. So read books. Read nonfiction books about things you never knew about, nor thought you'd ever want to know about. Written by people you don't know nor ever thought you'd want to know. Read books that agree with you, but also some authors that you disagree with. Reading things that you dislike or disagree with won't kill you. But not reading will. So read. For as one of my graduate professors, Dr. Joseph Martos, used to say, diplomas cost money, but education is free. I followed this sermon up later with one about my favorite films. I concluded it by saying, like all art forms, film can transform our hearts and minds and even our world. Consider some of your favorite films. Then go deeper into their meanings by exploring the reasons why they mean so much to you. Because sometimes being a couch potato is the best way to get moving. By the way, I saw a great movie this week called Gabriel. Have you heard of it? Yeah, with Keanu Reeves. He's an angel that's not so good at his job. But listen, this movie touches, in a brilliant way, it's so brilliantly written, it touches upon the plight of the working poor in this country. You know, the people that are living in their cars, who are working 3 jobs and still living in their cars. The ones that Trump dismisses as all being insane and on drugs. You got to see it. It's really poignant. So finally, as far as preaching to the preacher goes, in my commitment to helping others cope with our era of exponential change as we move toward the coming technological singularity, I have also spoken frequently about the singularity, artificial intelligence, and other technologies by reminding us, as the authors of Super Agency so perfectly say, you'll never get the future you want simply by prohibiting the future you don't want. Right? We have to, instead of concentrating on what we fear, concentrate on what we want and working to make it happen. But rather than merely speaking about the topic, I've increasingly tried to demonstrate the promise of such technology by including moving and meaningful music that I've created with it, only in recent months since that magic wand has been made available to me. And I want to conclude today with an example that is also another first for me, something that's just become possible. This is a song that I produced earlier that is turned into a short film that, believe it or not, took me about 2 hours to produce. 2 hours of my, that's the beauty of artificial intelligence, right? It takes what once took months and reduced it to hours and hours to seconds. So I think that's enough said. I think you'll enjoy this heartwarming example of my collaboration with artificial intelligence. Just about 3 minutes, and then I'll close with just a couple more sentences.
Took a rocket past the Milky Way. The stars were winking like they had something to say. Landed on a world so green, so blue. Then I saw her eyes and the cosmos felt brand new. Oh, she's my cosmic serenade. With every orbit, my heart's remade. Oh, she's my cosmic serenade. Her voice was music like Saturn's rings. She spoke in colors, oh, the joy it brings. I reached for her hand, she reached for mine. Time stood still in the galaxy. I'd stay on this planet till the end of June. The galaxies may spin, the suns may fade, but forever she'll be my cosmic
Thank you. Thank you. That was I had a lot of fun putting that together for sure. I don't know what I'm going to say in the coming months. Some of it will be reflective, some responsive, some fun, some creative. But whatever I talk about, I'm confident I am not going to run out of things to say, because I'll keep searching. And I'll keep growing, and it will remain my greatest privilege to continue sharing that journey with you. Thank you.